Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. It was reported last week that 3 free schools in England are run by groups that may have creationist views. Grindon Hall Christian School in Sunderland is a private school due to reopen in September, says on its website that it will affirm the position that Christians believe God's creation of the world is not just theory, but fact. British ministers have also approved a free school in Sevenoaks, Kent, that says on its website it will teach in RE classes that God made the world. Meanwhile, a third free school in Nottinghamshire is a fresh proposal from a group initially turned down over creationism. It's important to emphasise that no British state school is permitted to teach creationism as scientific fact. But in the US, where the campaign for creationism has been stronger, states of Louisiana and Tennessee have passed laws allowing science underpinning evolution to be critiqued in the classroom. So where exactly is the debate on teaching in schools creationism, or intelligent design as commonly known now? Should it be permitted in the interests of free speech? Is there a place for it to be taught alongside the theory of evolution? Or is it religion masquerading as science, and does it undermine scientific teaching in schools? Well, to discuss some of these aspects, I'm joined by Professor Andy McIntosh. He's a co-director of the group Truth and Science. Also on the line, we have Jeff Chapman, Director of the Creation Resources Trust. With me in the studio is Peter Williams. He's an ex-atheist, and from the group Catholic Voices. Joining me here also is Roger Stanyard, a spokesman from the British Centre for Science Education, and Alom Shahar, who's a science teacher and author of the book, The Young Atheist's Handbook. Well, I'm going to start with you, Andy McIntosh. Your group, Truth and Science, has produced educational literature, and you believe that creationism should be presented alongside evolution. Can you explain your reasoning for that? Do you see intelligent design as a science?
I just need to correct that. We believe that you need a balanced and fair assessment of all the evidence. We don't actually say that you should necessarily go straight into teaching a creation position. We do say, though, that evolution, which the government says must be taught, and you're quite right in your introduction, must be critically appraised. And we don't believe that prejudice should come in any way into the classroom. So we're most concerned about the British humanists who are advocating an agenda, basically, of secularism, and that's going to very much endanger balanced teaching in the classroom. We are really in danger of a tyranny if we're not careful, where Christians and other people who have a belief in creation are just completely sidelined. There is a genuine need to look at the evidence critically. That's our position.
Jeff Chapman from the Creation Resources Trust, do you share that concern?
I most certainly do, yes. I can understand why any fair-minded person would object to young people having a range of views presented to them and then making up their own minds. I believe that trying to prevent students hearing about alternative to Darwinism is an attack on academic freedom. I have a statement here in front of me signed by over 700 scientists from around the world, all of whom say they dissent from Darwin and that they think there are problems with it. Now, should students not be allowed to hear about this controversy? I think they should. I think we should credit them with enough intelligence to decide for themselves.
Roger Stanyard, it comes down to a question of presenting another point of view. Teenagers and young people aren't that impressionable. They can make up their own minds, can't they?
But the issue is not giving both sides the argument. There's no equivalence between young earth creationism, or if you want to cover it up with intelligent design, and mainstream science on this. In the United Kingdom, as far as we can make out, in the key areas of geology and evolutionary biology, there is only one practicing scientist who dissents from Darwinism and believes in young earth creationism. It's just not existent in the main body of science there on it. Jeff Chapman mentions the list of 700 people, which I believe is the list at the Discovery Institute. We checked that out thoroughly several years ago. In fact, I think it's more than that now, 800 or 900 on this. And what that list doesn't say is that it's a list of people who support either intelligent design or young earth creationism. The way that it's worded is that any scientist should be open-minded enough to realise that there are gaps in evolutionary biology. It's a theory, it's not a proof. And that's the way science works on that. We thoroughly checked out the English or British names on that list, and I think we found only one or two of something like 36 people there, were evolutionary biologists who accepted young Earth creationism. It's just a non-existent list.
Jeff Chapman, can we just clarify exactly what you believe in terms of creationism? Are we talking about young Earth creationism, that the world is only several thousand years old?
Yeah, that's where I stand, but I think this controversy is not about that. It's about whether Darwinism can even be criticised. I think that's what we're talking about. It's not necessarily pushing young Earth creationism, it's allowing people to understand the problems. As Roger's just said, there are gaps in the theory, and I think it's just allowing people to investigate and to understand why some people are sceptical of Darwinism. It's not a case of young Earth creationism, it's just a case of allowing people to be critical of evolution.
Alam Shah, I'll turn to you. You've written a book called The Young Atheist's Guidebook, and you are a science teacher. However groundbreaking Charles Darwin's findings are, shouldn't we as a mature society be questioning or critiquing him, even a sacred cow like him?
I don't think he is a sacred cow. I think that a genuinely good science education encourages children to question what they're taught. What we teach in science is critical thinking. So when we teach them about the theory of evolution, we're teaching them about a theory, and we're teaching students to understand what is meant by a scientific theory. And I think there's great confusion amongst people like this who support intelligent design and so forth as to what exactly a scientific theory is. A scientific theory is one that, A, explains a natural phenomenon, B, it must provide evidence for that explanation, and C, perhaps most importantly, that theory must provide the means by which we can make further predictions about the natural world, which we haven't already observed. Intelligent design doesn't do at least B or C. It is in no sense a scientific theory. And the word theory is bandied about by these people as if, anyone can just come up with a theory. But for something to be considered a scientific theory, there's an awful lot of intellectual effort that has to be put in.
Peter Williams from the group Catholic Voices.
Well, I think that we have to distinguish between two issues here. There's the moral or the prudential, if you like, and then there's the political issue. From a moral prudential perspective, I think I'm against creationism. I think that it is pseudoscience, and I'm against it being taught in schools. We're quite right to say that it is not a scientific theory. It is in fact going not by inductive reasoning, which is the scientific reasoning you would generally come to theories about, but by a kind of abductive or deductive reasoning. And it isn't really very good science, and actually it's terrible theology, apart from anything else. You have to really ignore the literary genre of Genesis in order to come up with this literal, scientific, historical idea of what it's trying to say. It's not trying to communicate scientific fact. What it's trying to communicate is religious truth based on historic fact. So I'm against creationism from that perspective, but I'm also very serious about the political relevance here. I do think that whilst, and in fact they are not allowed, these creationist schools, to teach creationism in scientific classes, or even in RE classes, I hasten to add, as prescriptively, they might describe it, they might in a religious class say, some people believe this, but I do believe that I think creationist evangelicals do have the right to set up schools, and as long as they don't abuse that, if we're going to allow Muslims to set up schools, it would be invidious to make a distinction against evangelical Christians who teach creationism, so as part of their own personal religious beliefs. So I think that they have the right to set up schools. I think that's absolutely important to stress.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. We're discussing evolution or creationism. To discuss this is Andy McIntosh, Jeff Chapman, Peter Williams, Roger Stanyard and Alam Shah. So Andy McIntosh, I'll turn to you. It's bad theology and bad science.
That's totally incorrect for the first point that was being said by Peter Williams. He's right on the last point, of course, and that is I've already stated that we would be in a tyrannical situation if you weren't going to allow people who had different perspectives to set up schools as long as they abide by the government guidelines. But he's wrong on the first point. It's historical Christianity, yes, which for centuries has produced people like Michael Faraday, people like Robert Boyle, goes all the way back to Newton. All of these were actually people who had just a simple belief in creation.
These were all religious people. They weren't creationists. You can't possibly say that.
Now this is a very important point. The Royal Society has a motto which is nullius in verba, which means on the word of no one. So I do not advocate taking a religious perspective into science. You've got to actually find what the evidence actually points towards, build up a theory. You need to make predictions based on that science. You can do perfectly good science in that way based on a design perspective if you think that the evidence is pointing that way, or you can, as people have been trying to do, from an evolutionary perspective for the last 150 years. And the evolutionary perspective, of course, is the modern way, and that is the relatively new way. And we are saying that actually it's coming to the end of the road. Many people are now challenging evolutionary ideas within standard literature. It's a minority. I'm not talking about Christian publications here. I'm talking about the standard literature. I can find articles now which are beginning to challenge that. Now, we need to have a proper debate which says, are the predictions viable that are being made from this theory? And you'll find that the predictions are very questionable. So, although I agree with Alam Shah's definition about science, I've been working in science for the last 30 years, and I agree with him, obviously, on that we need to have a proper, very critical, scientific approach to the evolutionary perspective and say, now look, there is an alternative. That also
but creationism, surely it would lead you to dismiss a lot of the findings of science. It would lead you to dismiss chemistry, totally physics, the majority of geology.
No, that's totally the wrong way to look at things. Evolution is a paradigm. It's a way of interpreting the evidence. I don't mind people having that. Obviously, the majority do. And we must not in any way suggest that they must be silent. The problem is that the majority are trying to batten down the hatches as though somehow this is sacrosanct. It's not sacrosanct.
Well, I don't think anybody's trying to batten down any hatches. The way science works is the theory of evolution is the most powerful idea perhaps that we've ever had, and does a wonderful job of explaining biology. But there is no decent biologist out there who, if he or she stumbled across some evidence which contradicted Darwin's theory, that they wouldn't publish and be excited about that. Because ultimately, if we found things that contradicted Darwin's theory, we would be making progress, and that would be exciting to scientists. I suspect we will evolve a better theory. I mean, Darwin's theory is not complete. Science is constantly improving on it. So scientific theories are useful within a particular context, and it just so happens that Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is the single most powerful explanation of how life works that we currently have.
Roger Stenyard from the British Centre for Science Education, what do you make of that?
The idea of equivalence, that somehow people are being locked out of the debate. The creationists are quite entitled to debate. All they have to do is to get onto the science conference circuit, present papers in respected, reputable, peer-reviewed journals, and put together consistent arguments. Nobody is stopping you that at all. The reason why you want to get it into schools has nothing to do with that open debate. It's a religious movement. It's an evangelical religious movement that's basically come out of the United States and does not like secularism in mainstream education on this. And it's even more absurd than that, because in the United Kingdom, religious education is actually compulsory. Yep. Although it's not always applied very thoroughly, it's there, and as are indeed religious services at the beginning of the school day on this. So you actually have a platform in schools to teach this.
It's part of what the Discovery Institute labels the wedge strategy. They came up with a way to undermine science. There's no doubt about it that there's documents which have been made public where the Discovery Institute wants to undermine science because they feel that science is a threat to religion, when actually, I'll say this as a science teacher, science does not need to threaten religion. Exactly. The two can coexist.
Peter Williams, science and religion aren't incompatible, and perhaps evolution can be explained by followers. This is God's way of creation.
This is actually just really very bad thought, apart from anything else. Within science, you engage in what's known as methodological naturalism. To be a methodological naturalist means that you go about trying to find natural causes. You don't just say, oh, well, God did it. That's really lazy thinking, apart from anything else. But beyond that, it's actually really bad theology, as I say, because you don't need it to be a methodological naturalist. You don't need to be a philosophical naturalist. You don't have to believe that the natural causes are the only things that exist. There can't be a God. There can't be the supernatural. The two simply are not necessary for one another. In fact, the scientific method itself has come out of historic Christianity. I mean, it was Bishop Grosseteste, the Bishop of Lincoln in this country, who formulated an early form of the scientific method. So it's actually from good, sound Christianity, authentic and historic Christianity, that science was helped to become what it is today. It's out of a Judeo-Christian culture. And one final thing, I think that with regards to creationism and intelligent design, when you look at the origins of these beliefs, you find them really in very late thinkers. So this is not something which is historic Christianity.
Jeff Chapman from the Creation Resources Trust. Surely the starting point for any scientist is they change their opinion in face of evidence. If evidence changes, their opinion changes. Presumably a group like yours has to present that evidence.
I agree that the evidence is important. No, we don't, I'm sure Andy would agree, we don't deny any absolute fact of science. We would argue over the interpretation. I was rather interested that Roger should say that creationists should publish in scientific journals. He knows as well as I do that there's a total block on anything that questions Darwinism in the major journals. That people have actually been sacked in America because they've dared to question Darwinism. That's not possible in this climate to dissent from Darwin in the official science journals. But I think an important point needs to be made. Someone mentioned the religious side, and I think this is just as much true on the side of the secularists like Roger, because what they are really afraid of is that young people might start to believe in God. In fact, the secular society, I'm not sure if Roger belongs to them, but they have said they want to totally secularize education and remove all religion from education. And all we're saying is let young people hear both sides.
I think I object to his suggestion that we're somehow scared of young children believing in God and so forth. And actually he's given away what he's really about. So they present themselves as wanting to challenge science and to be scientific and to look at the controversy and whatnot. But what he's actually just said is that he is scared that religion will disappear from the lives of young children. So what this is really about is ensuring that young children continue to be indoctrinated in those particular religious beliefs.
Absolutely not. That's not true at all.
I think that's what you've just said. I'm sorry.
Surely it's a simple matter of logic that just because the National Secular Society might be against something doesn't mean that all Christians should be for it. Surely, that doesn't mean just because some people don't want young children to believe in God, assuming that they do, that doesn't mean that you must therefore oppose the very thing that they're in favour of. That's just not logical.
Okay, Andy McIntosh?
Brendan, let me just try and clarify this. There's a real muddle going on here. We need to be clear that on the Christian side, we are not battening down the hatches in any way. We are not trying to say that there should not be allowed the atheist to come in if he so wishes to present his view. But what's going on actually is that the secular movement and the British humanists and those like them, when it comes to them wanting to put their own view, they are saying there's no way that the Christians must be allowed to put their side. The British humanists are even saying that a creation position could not be taught in RE. Point. Now that is totally ridiculous. The danger of indoctrination must be removed. That is, you mustn't be saying that someone can just present their view without another alternative being put there. Evolution is an interpretation.
There's a non-fiction book by Eric von Däniken which suggests that our culture originates with aliens. That's an alternative view. Nobody is suggesting we teach that in history.
Let's let Andy McIntosh finish.
Let me just finish. You then have to interpret the facts. It's not a modern idea to say that there is a creation starting point. Even the Big Bang, which I don't personally subscribe to, has a beginning. And
Absolutely,
that really alerted many people to a real danger, they thought, because, this is going to bring God into it.
I think you're an embarrassment to Christians. I really do. I have a great deal of respect for theologians and religious people and admire how they try to make sense of the world. And there are much more sophisticated interpretations of Christianity that if I was going to have my children exposed to religious ideas, I would want them to be exposed to religious ideas that were at least a little bit more sophisticated.
If we're going to teach evolution in schools, and it is part of the curriculum, at what age can children handle that?
As the only teacher here, I can categorically state that at no point in a child's education do we tell them that there is no God. If you're a Christian parent or a Muslim parent or a Jewish parent, you probably tell these stories to your children and you hope that they grow up believing in them.
I think we have to clarify from earlier on. I'm not saying that no one before the 19th or 18th century said there wasn't a beginning to the universe. It certainly was quite a controversy, though. Even then, what I'm saying is that there wasn't a consensus around, there must have been a literal 6-day period in which there was an Adam and an Eve and a garden and a tree and all this sort of thing, or even a more sort of old Earth creationist view. These are simply modern ideas. These are not ancient ideas in terms of the consensus. They certainly did exist before then, but they certainly were not the consensus. But not only that, but things like the Big Bang Theory. I mean, the guy who came up with the Big Bang hypothesis was a priest. He was a Catholic priest. He was a Monsignor. So the idea that you need to have this conflict between science and religion, or an idea that God created the universe and evolutionary science, is simply false. It is a false antithesis, and it is insulting to good theology and to good science to make.
Okay, Andy McIntosh, turn to you.
That's incorrect. It's always been the straightforward view of Christians. They may not know necessarily how old the world is. There's been lots of disagreement on that. But there's always been the traditional Christian view that God created the world. It's very disingenuous for Peter Williams to suggest otherwise.
But in that way, if that's true, then can't evolution be taught with a Christian message? Do they necessarily have to be mutually exclusive?
Well, sometimes people do that. I don't personally have that view, but certainly that can be done. But we also need to allow for a critical appraisal of evolution itself.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. We're discussing evolution or creationism in schools. With me is Peter Williams from the group Catholic Voices, Roger Stanyard, spokesman for the British Centre for Science Education, Alam Shaha, a science teacher and author of the book The Young Atheist's Handbook. On the line we have Professor Andy McIntosh, co-director of the group Truth and Science, and Jeff Chapman, director of the Creation Resources Trust. Okay, Roger Stanyard, you look like you want to say something.
This goes back to what is modern-day young Earth creation. It's an import from the United States. And one of the problems they got in the United States, in about a third of state schools, they just cannot teach evolutionary biology at all. The teachers are shouted down by fundamentalist children. The parents put pressure on children. So they've got a very, very poor basis for the science education in the United States. This is what happens. Creationism is not a debate about science versus religion. It's a political movement. What we have in the United Kingdom has been imported from the United States since 1970.
Jeff Chapman, do you get the feeling that there is a groundswell of support that's increasing behind your group, the Creation Resources Trust, and where is your group at in terms of its promotion?
We don't have a membership. We just provide resources, so it's not a case of the number of members. But I've certainly found over the last 30 years that more and more people have supported our point of view. But I'd just like to comment on what Roger said about politics. There's nothing whatever political about what we're doing. Nothing whatever. All we're doing is asking people to look at the facts. Nothing to do with politics. We're not political in any way. I resent the idea that there's some political motive behind this. There is not.
Peter Williams, it's not a political movement necessarily, and to draw those comparisons with the extremists in the United States is a bit fanciful here in the United Kingdom, isn't it?
It could be, it could not be. I think that there is evidence that there is some kind of platform. But I'm going to take the guys opposite us at their word and say that they don't have a political agenda here. And I think it's important not to attribute takeover theories to them, just in case people try to use that and I'm kind of worried that these sort of activities that they're engaging in are actually going to help the kind of people who want to exclude faith schools and want to exclude people from education who are religious. I think that's quite a worry from my concern. But ultimately, I really have to take issue with people like Andy McIntosh who try to assert that this is in any way historic Christianity, what they're doing. It was actually, when the theory of evolution came out, Charles Darwin came out, it was not many people really thought it was much of a controversy in theological circles, certainly not in the Catholic Church. It was really very, very low. People like Bishop Wilberforce came along later on and were absolutely incensed about it. But really, this is such a modern controversy, and people like Andy McIntosh, with a view of Scripture and a view of science which is so compromised, are doing such damage to the public view of authentic Christianity. I really am quite annoyed at it.
Alam Shaha, you've written a book about atheism. Do you think if more people knew about evolution and the more people learn about it, that more people would become atheists? Or?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. People often say to me, are you an atheist because you're a scientist? And I say no, it's probably the other way around. I was drawn to science because religious answers didn't resonate with me. And I think the reasons why people have belief or don't have belief are complicated. And I think often this division between science and religion is hugely exaggerated. So, for example, the Catholic Church accepts evolution as the mechanism by which life evolved.
Peter Williams is wrong in his assessment of the traditional Christian view.
It's not the traditional Christian view.
I'm
sorry.
Let me just finish, because Peter did have a good go on this. we know that when you actually look back at the debate that was going on in the 1800s, most people believed in a creation position. It did rock the church at the time because the church wasn't prepared.
Would you like to give me an example?
Would you
like to give me an example of one theologian who had this problem? One real big theologian. Give me one.
And Wilberforce actually illustrated that point. So we know that there was definitely a Judeo-Christian outlook which had been with us for centuries and simply just basically stated that God created the world. Not everybody was agreeing.
Not in 6 days. Not in 6 days. Not in a literalistic understanding you're taking. Sorry.
Position. To say that that is just recent is totally disingenuous.
No, the apologetic technique that you've used, creationism, intelligent design, all of it is incredibly recent. And yes, there were people who believed in a literal 6-day period before 1800. Yes, absolutely. But that was never the consensus position, and it certainly was not the position of people like St. Augustine or people like John Henry Newman, who we beatified last year, who was a 19th century thinker. None of these people had a problem with the idea that this was in fact an allegorical text. This is not giving us literal scientific fact. None of them had this problem because that was always the literary genre of the text itself. An authentic reading of the text does not give the interpretation that you have given. And it was not the majority position of theologians before.
Now come in and is trying to even suggest that God wasn't even involved.
It doesn't. Look, that's not what evolution entails. Evolution makes no claim about God. It doesn't have anything to say about God.
God was somehow on the sidelines of an evolutionary process. You know full well that that was not the position of the Judeo-Christian outlook up to the mid-1800s.
No, I'm sorry. There's simply this is a controversy that is modern, and we did not have a view on these specific issues until the time that they came up. It is disingenuous or ignorant to suggest that it did.
Fine. Well, we're running short on time. I want to turn to you, Roger Stanyard, from the British Centre for Science Education. If creationism is a significant strand of thought in British society, what's the problem with that?
Well, I don't consider it to be a significant strand. As I pointed out, the whole of science completely rejects it in the United Kingdom on it. Most of the claimed scientists who say they're young Earth creationists are not mainstream scientists practicing biology.
Okay, but people who have no background at all in science.
Let's go back to the figure of just how many people believe in creationism in the United Kingdom on this. About 6% of the population attend church on a Sunday, and if you extrapolate the figures where they go to church midweek or once a month or whatever, it's no more than about 15% of the population. And certainly creationism does not get the support of that 15%. It's concentrated in 4 main sects and denominations, and certainly not the Catholic Church, certainly not the Methodist Church. So it's got a very, very small theological base and a support base in the United Kingdom. And there's a really big problem that you don't have any support base in the United Kingdom. I would say there's no more than about 1% of the population of the United Kingdom.
We could be discussing this all day, and there's plenty of material to discuss. But I'd just like to finish by thanking all my guests: Andy McIntosh, co-director of the Group of Truth and Science; Jeff Chapman, director of the Creation Resources Trust; Peter Williams from the group Catholic Voices; Roger Stanyard, spokesman for the British Centre for Science Education; and Alam Shaha, physics teacher and author of the book The Young Atheist's Handbook. Thank you very much for joining me here on The Voice of Russia.
We go straight into teaching a creation position. We do say, though, that evolution, which the government says must be taught, and you're quite right in your introduction, must be critically appraised, and we don't believe that prejudice should come in any way into the classroom. So we're most concerned about the British humanists who are advocating an agenda, basically, of secularism, and that's going to very much endanger balanced teaching in the classroom. We are really in danger of a tyranny if we're not careful, where Christians and other people who have a belief in creation are just completely sidelined. There is a genuine need to look at the evidence critically. That's our position.
Jeff Chapman from the Creation Resources Trust, do you share that concern?
I most certainly do, yes. I cannot understand why any fair-minded person would object to young people having a range of views presented to them and then making up their own minds. I believe that trying to prevent students hearing about alternative to Darwinism is an attack on academic freedom. I have a statement here in front of me signed by over 700 scientists from around the world, all of whom say they dissent from Darwin and that they think there are problems with it. Now, should students not be allowed to hear about this controversy? I think they should. I think we should credit them with enough intelligence to decide for themselves.
Roger Stanyard, it comes down to a question of presenting another point of view. Teenagers and young people aren't that impressionable. They can make up their own minds, can't they?
But the issue is not giving both sides the argument. There's no equivalence between young earth creationism, or if you want to cover it up with intelligent design, and mainstream science on this. In the United Kingdom, as far as we can make out, in the key areas of geology and evolutionary biology, there is only one practicing scientist who dissents from Darwinism and believes in young earth creationism. It's just not existent in the main body of science there on it. Jeff Chapman mentions the list of 700 people, which I believe...
Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Brendan Cole. It was reported last week that 3 free schools in England are run by groups that may have creationist views. Brendan Cole Christian School in Sunderland, as a private school due to reopen in September, says on its website that it will affirm the position that Christians believe God's creation of the world is not just theory, but fact. British ministers have also approved a free school in Sevenoaks, Kent, that says on its website it will teach in RE classes that God made the world. Meanwhile, a third free school in Nottinghamshire is a fresh proposal from a group initially turned down over creationism. It's important to emphasise that no British state school is permitted to teach creationism as scientific fact. But in the US, where the campaign for creationism has been stronger, states of Louisiana and Tennessee have passed laws allowing science underpinning evolution to be critiqued in the classroom. So where exactly is the debate on teaching in schools creationism, or intelligent design as it is commonly known now? Should it be permitted in the interests of free speech? Is there a place for it to be taught alongside the theory of evolution? Or is it religion masquerading as science, and does it undermine scientific teaching in schools? Well, to discuss some of these aspects, I'm joined by Professor Andy McIntosh. He's a co-director of the group Truth and Science. Also on the line, we have Jeff Chapman, Director of the Creation Resources Trust. With me in the studio is Peter Williams. He's an ex-atheist, and from the group Catholic Voices. Joining me here also is Roger Stanyard, a spokesman from the British Centre for Science Education, and Alom Shah, who's a science teacher and author of the book, The Young Atheist's Handbook. Well, I'm going to start with you, Andy McIntosh. Your group, Truth and Science, has produced educational literature, and you believe that creationism should be presented alongside evolution. Can you explain your reasoning for that? Do you see intelligent design as a science?
Just need to correct that. We believe that you need a balanced and fair assessment of all the evidence. We don't actually say that you should necessarily...
Is the list at the Discovery Institute. We checked that out thoroughly several years ago. In fact, I think it's more than that now, 800 or 900 on this. And what that list doesn't say is that there's a list of people who support either intelligent design or young earth creationism. The way that it's worded is that any scientist should be open-minded enough to realise that there are gaps in evolutionary biology. It's a theory, it's not a proof, and that's the way science works on that. We thoroughly checked out the English or British names on that list, and I think we found only 1 or 2 or something like 36 people there were evolutionary biologists who accepted young earth creationism. It's just a non-existent list.
Jeff Chapman, can we just clarify exactly what you believe in terms of creationism? Are we talking about young earth creationism, that the world is only several thousand years old?
Yeah, that's where I stand, but I think this controversy is not about that. It's about